Hi everyone. So in this lecture we'll discuss claims that people make and when or how do we come to a decision on whether or not to believe them. Now, we've talked about arguments so far in our course, and arguments are based upon claims. So when people make claims for their arguments, at what point do we go, oh, okay, I'll believe your claim, and what point do we go, wait a minute, I don't think this is very plausible. So we'll take a look at believability of claims. So let's recall an argument we looked at earlier in our class. John is tall enough to ride the roller coaster. You are taller than John. Therefore, you are tall enough to ride the roller coaster. Hopefully, you recognize this as a deductive argument where we have the following two premises. John is tall enough to ride the roller coaster. You are taller than John. And if the premises are true, then you kind of have to believe you are tall enough to ride the roller coaster, right? So it's a deductive argument because the conclusion has to be true if the first two claims, right, if the premises are true. So we would say it's a valid argument because the premises, if true, would necessarily lead to the conclusion being true. We would say we would not know whether to say it's a sound argument because what we need to first verify is, whether those first two claims are actually true. And at that point, we can say whether or not we can believe the conclusion, right? So even though the logic makes sense, if the reasons they give us for believing the conclusion aren't true, well, then obviously you should not believe the conclusion. So what we need is a way to assess the believability of a claim, a way for us to come to a judgment on our own whether or not we want to believe somebody is telling us. So again, we'll take a look at another argument we looked at earlier in our course. Right? Given the following premises, the criminal wears size 7 shoes, only members of the boy band NSYNC could have committed this crime, and Justin Timberlake is the only member with size 7 shoes, we must come to the conclusion that Justin Timberlake must have committed the crime. Now, as we look at each of those premises, the criminal wears size 7 shoes, only members of the boy band NSYNC could have committed the crime, Justin Timberlake is the only member with size 7 shoes. Do any of those claims seem less believable to you than others? Now think about which ones seem more or less believable to you and ask yourself why, right? How is it that right now you are gauging which claims appear to you to be a little more believable than the others? Do they all seem kind of ridiculous? Does one seem more ridiculous than the other? Think about what your intuition is telling you and why it might be telling you that. What would make you more likely to believe or less likely to believe one or more of these claims? What would you have to know, see, hear for yourself to come to a decision whether or not, oh yeah, I think that's more likely or not to be true? Well, what we see is probably you were using one of two factors here. One is how believable the claim is in itself, right? How believable is it that those statements are true just based upon your ear? And if you were thinking deeply about this, you might want to ask yourself, well, how do we know this stuff? How do we know those three things to be true? In which case, you'd be asking questions about the credibility of the source of those claims. So in today's lecture, we'll look specifically at the believability of a claim. And then next lecture, we'll take a look at how to assess the credibility of the source of claims. Okay. So let's take a look at the following claims. And for yourself, think about how believable these things are. There is a person of Asian heritage in this room. So usually these are, I give these to our students in the live class setting. So just imagine yourself in the classroom and somebody said to you, hey, there's somebody here that's a person of Asian heritage. Imagine somebody saying, as you're in that classroom, there are 42 chairs in this room. Imagine somebody saying to you, there is a person in this room who has auditioned for the TV show America's Got Talent. Imagine somebody says to you, there's somebody in this room that is over 7 feet tall. Imagine somebody saying to you, hey, there's somebody here in this room that has 6 fingers on one hand. Imagine somebody saying to you, hey, look, there are spiders on the chalkboard. Or somebody saying to you, someone in this class is hiding a dog in their bag. Well, when you are being told these claims, I mean, how do you assess their believability? What would you do to assess their believability? Well, chances are you just look around the room, right? You would probably take a look at the room and then see these claims and gauge whether or not the claims fit your experience, right? What you see. This is what's referred to as empirical, right? Empirical refers to evidence-based, experiential. So based upon your experience about what you see in the room, you go, oh, look, there's a bunch of chairs. I don't know, roughly it can look like 42 of them. You quickly look around the room and you notice that there's nobody whose head is much higher above anybody else. So I don't know, about someone being 7 feet tall, right? So you'd come to a sense of believability based upon your sense experience, based upon your personal observations. But what else is coming into play here? What else do you do? What else are you doing when you say, well, you know what? I think there's a better chance that there are spiders on the chalkboard than there is that somebody here has auditioned for America's Got Talent. Or what would make you say something like, you know, I think there's a greater chance that there is a person in this room of Asian heritage than there is of somebody here with 6 fingers. What else would you rely on other than, you know, your ability to see and experience? Because you probably would have an intuition about believability of these claims, even if you don't go around checking everybody's hand and seeing how many fingers they have, right? You probably have a sense for how likely or unlikely it is that somebody here may have auditioned for America's Got Talent without actually asking them. So what else are you using besides personal observation? Well, to make it even clearer, let's take a look at another list of claims. Right? What if I told you someone in this class is from the planet Mars? What if I told you that the chairs in this room are made out of fairy dust? What if I told you that there's a person in this room who was a celebrity judge on America's Got Talent? What if I told you somebody in this room owns an invisible car? What if I told you there are spiders on the chalkboard that can create webs made out of gold? What if I said somebody in this class is hiding a dog in their bag that can sing, "Who Let the Dogs Out?" Okay, now how would you order these claims in terms of believability? Take a quick second to think for yourself how you might do that. Which one seems more likely than others? Maybe not even plausible, but just at least more likely than some of these others. And think to yourself, well, what criteria are you using to make that sort of judgment? What is it that you are telling yourself that makes you believe maybe that there is a greater chance of somebody in this room hiding a dog that can sing "Who Let the Dogs Out" more than there's a chance that somebody here owns an invisible car? What did you use? Well, what you see here is a list of items with claims that maybe question or go against what you already believe. They kind of seem unusual or impossible based upon your background, based upon your understanding of how the world works, right? So maybe you don't believe in fairy dust. Maybe you don't believe in spiders that can create webs out of gold. So because you have a pre-existing way of looking at the world, because you have, you know, through your life, you've gained knowledge, you've gained experience, you've gained an understanding of how the world is. So you have this background information that's already stored in your head so that when you are exposed to a new claim, you can compare it to what you already know and you go, that doesn't fit with how I understand the world to be. So for instance, something like there is a person in the room who was a celebrity judge on America's Got Talent. Well, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's something that may not be very plausible, but considering that there's nothing supernatural about it, considering that there's nothing physically impossible about the claim, might make you say, well, that claim is a little bit more believable than believing that there are chairs in this room that's made out of fairy dust. Just because from your understanding of how the world is, fairy dust is not something that exists in reality. Now, maybe you can think about the video you watched for a discussion this week, where you were exposed to somebody who fell for a very famous scam, right? Oftentimes, when we fall prey to believing something that could be obviously not true if we compared it to our common sense, that would be obviously not true if we just compared it to how we think the world actually works, what we notice is that we'll often believe something because we just kind of want to believe it, right? There are some claims people will make that we will believe in because psychologically, emotionally, it makes us feel good to believe it. That's probably what happens when people get scammed, like you saw in the discussion video for the Nigerian 411 scam. But think about politics. Think about how easily some people fall prey to claims about certain sides of the political aisle, where if you are far left, you might believe some crazy headlines about the far right or about people that are conservative or Republican because you kind of want to, because it kind of reinforces a picture you have of a certain side. It doesn't necessarily fit in with your understanding of reality per se, but it fits in with what you want reality to be like. Same thing with the other side of the aisle. You can imagine people on the far right who are given headlines on their Twitter feeds or their Facebook feeds of ridiculous claims about, Barack Obama or certain Democratic candidates, and how easily some will believe it because they just want to, because it makes them feel good to believe that their side is a certain way and the other side is a certain way. We as human beings don't just think logically, we think emotionally. We are swayed by emotion. We're swayed by desire, needs. So it's really important to be aware of, wait a minute, this claim, let's check it with, what I see, what I've experienced firsthand. Then what about checking it to what we know of reality, right? Of actual evidence and to our common sense understanding of how the world actually works. Am I believing something just because it makes me feel good, or because it is it reinforces my side of an issue, or am I believing it because it actually makes sense based upon how I know the world to be like? Now, obviously, the major issue is that some of us will hold on or have beliefs of how the world is like that are biased, right? Because of how we grow up, because of the people we surround ourselves with, we can start to have a story or a picture of how the world is that may not necessarily be true. So when we see a claim, it may actually make sense. It may actually fit with how we already see the world. So it could be useful to always maybe take a step back and look for evidence, right? Look for some sort of empirical justification for it. So anyway, we're just having a discussion here on how we can come to believe certain claims and what to watch out for. If I said to you something ridiculous, what you might notice is that what you really need is stronger evidence to accept the ridiculous claim. Because lots of people have made ridiculous claims throughout the world, right? Throughout our history. When we used to think that the Earth was flat, somebody made the ridiculous claim that the Earth was round, and it's good to ask for a lot of evidence to believe it, because the more unbelievable the claim, well, the stronger the argument or evidence you'd want to convince yourself to sway to the other side. So if I gave you these three claims, the teacher owns a duck, the teacher owns a dump truck, the teacher owns a hippopotamus, which claim would require more evidence to sway you to believe it? Right? Which claim would you go, no, I would need some significant proof here for me to believe that? Is it the teacher owns a duck? Is it the teacher owns a dump truck? Or is it the teacher owns a hippopotamus? Well, one way to gauge this is to ask yourself which claim brings up more questions. If I said to you the teacher owns a duck, well, your obvious question might be why. But beyond that, you can imagine somebody owning a duck. That's not too outside the realm of possibility. If I said to you, a teacher owns a dump truck, you might ask questions about, why, or what does he do with it, or where would you put it? If somebody said to you, the teacher owns a hippopotamus, well, the questions of why, questions of where you would put it, how do you feed it, you end up having lots more questions about it, which should tell you that this might be a little bit harder to believe, or at least you should question it more, right? So one way then to gauge believability is to ask yourself which claim raises more questions for you, right? So with regards to saying I own a hippopotamus, you'd ask questions about how did I get it? Where does he keep it? Doesn't it go against the law to keep one of those things? Right. So the more questions that come up for you when you hear a claim, the less believable it might be, or at least believable it should be to you. You should require more evidence, stronger evidence, before you believe it. Okay, let's take a look at a set of claims. The teacher lives with 30 dogs and cats. The teacher has eaten 30 large pizzas on a given day. The teacher has run 30 miles on a given day. Okay, which one of these raises more questions for you? Which one of these would you require more evidence to believe? Well, 30 dogs and cats, that's a lot of dogs and cats. You probably will wonder why he would do that, or where would he put them, or how does he clean after all of those, or what would be the purpose of it? How did he collect so many of them? A teacher has eaten 30 large pizzas on a given day. Well, a large pizza is pretty large. How would he get past a couple without barfing, right? Why would he do such a thing? So maybe there's more questions for you about the pizzas than for the dogs and cats. The teacher has run 30 miles in a given day. Well, you might ask questions about how will you be able to survive running that far or that long in a given day? Where would you get the time to do that? So the more questions arises for you, the more evidence you would need to believe it, well, then maybe the less believable it is, right? This is one way of gauging for yourself. When somebody gives you a claim and you maybe intuitively want to believe it, well, maybe ask yourself, well, how plausible is this? How many questions does it raise? How much evidence would I need to support or to answer, those questions? So, to summarize then, when we hear a claim, whether it's from mom and dad or a teacher or a friend or a political pundit or a politician, ask yourself, or from a news headline, does it match what you've seen of the world? Does it match your experience or your personal observations? Does it match your idea of how the world works? Does it match what you know of the world? Based upon what you've studied, based upon what you've learned, based upon, again, personal observation. The extent to which a claim fits with our background information, the extent to which it fits with what we see, well, that should determine how initially plausible it seems, right? Because you can always dig further to confirm for yourself whether or not you want to make a decision based upon a claim. Right? You make decisions all the time. And sometimes a decision is not so important, where if you're right or wrong, it's just good to make the decision so you can move forward. But some decisions are pretty important, where you need to step back and ask yourself, okay, the reason I'm making this choice, what are they? How believable are those reasons? Are those reasons something I believe just because it feels good to me, or just because I want to believe it? Or does it really make sense based upon what I see? Does it really make sense based upon how I understand the world to be? These are important questions. And then one way to judge the degree of the believability of the claim is to think about, well, how many questions arise if you want to believe the claim? How much evidence would somebody need to go, okay, there's a reasonable chance that this claim is true? All right. So when we come back, we'll take a look at the other half of this. In addition to just taking a look initially to gauge the plausibility of a claim, it's kind of important to ask ourselves, well, where does that claim come from? Who told us that? And maybe we can gauge the credibility of the person giving us that claim.